Hello, my name's Colin Campbell, I'm with Polygon. You're looking at Necropolis. It's created by Harebrained Schemes, the studio that was co-founded by Jordan Wiseman. You might remember his name from creating Mech Warrior and Shadowrun and all that FASA stuff back in the 90s. He calls this world one great big death trap, and you can sort of see why. It's one of those games where you're going to get killed a lot, and we'll talk about that some more. I mean, I went to play the game in our offices a couple of days ago with the art director, Mike McCain. He likes to call it Dark Souls Light mixed with Spelunky, and you know, it's very much inspired by Dark Souls. I think we did a preview on Polygon about a year ago. My colleague Brian wrote it, and you can find out more about the inspiration from that game if you search for it on Polygon. Talking of polygons, you know, there are a lot of them in this game. They haven't gone large on textures. They've kept it graphically very simple. I think part of that is to do with aesthetic preferences and partly to do with budgets. You know, obviously it costs a lot of money to create these sorts of worlds, but I think the look of the game is pleasing. We put it in our 100 games to watch in 2016, partly because we just liked the way that it looked. I think we put it in the good looking section of that feature. But what the game is really about is it's a procedurally generated 3D combat world with perma-death. I mean, that basically sums it all up. That means that when you go into this world, you have one life. When you get killed, that's it. You go back to the beginning. There are no save points. I mean, you can save your game and go back to it later, but there are no save points. You go back to the beginning and you start all over again. And you know, each time you play, the world is slightly different. And you know, therein is the the Spelunky reference. Right from the start, the enemies are tough. There's no kind of learning curve here. They come at you in random waves. There are a random selection of enemies, and you just have to deal with it as they turn up. But the good news is there's a lot of loot to be had along the way, including a nice big chest at the beginning where you get your basic weapons. And that random loot gives you sometimes powerful weapons from the get-go. When I played, here you can see we've got a really nice scimitar that really helped us a lot to get through some of these early enemies that came at us. It's all about the getting your loot and then watching the patterns of the enemies that you come across. Obviously, as you get to play this game, as you get used to it, as you die and are reborn, you get to know the different enemies and you get to figure out what their patterns are and how best to kind of get round their back and slice them in half type stuff. And that's where the Dark Souls reference comes in. It's just about watching patterns, constantly moving, constantly jumping back, and figuring out what the enemies are like. And obviously, in each game, the enemies are they're the same. They don't change. There are interactive stuff in this game along the way. You might go along, and obviously there are doors to open, there are boxes to open, and all that stuff. But there are also kind of interactive traps that you can use or you can fall prey to, but mostly you can use, and so that you can unleash a monster against the enemies, or you can move platforms in order to trap them somewhere and keep them away from you. And I found that to be quite useful when you want to just get through enemies and keep away from them. Here, just there, you saw the inventory screen, which is really super simple. You've got your weapons, your basic weapons. You've got your basic health. There's some real basic crafting, potion crafting, and such like. But it's really simple stuff, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that later on in the game. The story itself it lists a lot of tropes from those old Dungeons and Dragons fantasy games from the 80s and 90s, as you might expect from somebody like Wiseman. And basically, this character called the Brazen Head sends you into this necropolis, and whatever is an untrustworthy cove. You're never quite sure where it's coming from. Along the way, the story there's extra depth added to the story through graffiti that you find along the way, and it's interesting that they've managed to thread a story through what is a randomly generated world of rooms and corridors and pathways. Combat is dual-handed. It's super simple. You've got your basic, you've got your sort of your jumps and jump back. You've got moves including a strike, power strike. You've got a block. You've got a shove. So you can use both your hands. Mostly when I played it, we just used the shield, but you can get rid of the shield and use a like a crossbow or some other one-handed ranged weapon. But generally speaking, it's pretty simple. You've got heavy attacks as well, but you can see that there's a sort of greenish blue gauge at the bottom of the screen, and that tells you how many of those attacks that you can use at any one time. So you can't just run around doing heavy attacks all the time. You just saw that my character there ate a piece of food, and that's how you manage your health. Health is supplemented by eating food found along the way. Now, there are two kinds of foods. First of all, there's fresh food, which is good. You eat that, you get a health boost, and in the midst of a big fight against loads of enemies, if you can step aside and grab a snack, that is wonderful. Then you'll get through that particular combat situation. You get through the hostiles. But if you're out of good food, then what you might have in your knapsack is just bad food, is rotten food, and then you really take your chances. The rotten food might fill you up and give you a health boost, but at the same time, it might paralyze you or make you sick or do something bad to you, in which case you're probably going to die. So it's a real situation where you only want to use that stuff when you really are, your back's against the wall and you haven't got much of an opportunity. And the same kind of goes for potions. The nature of a potion that you find along the way is at first unknown. So let's just say that you're walking along and you find a purple potion. You're probably not going to just drink it because you just don't know what it does. It might give you a sort of health or a power boost, but at the same time it might paralyze you and make you weak or sick or dead or whatever, and you just won't know until you try it. And so as with the bad food, you might not try it until you're really in a bad situation and just see what the hell it does. But the good news is that once you try that whatever that colour is, let's say the purple potion, it's always going to do that same thing throughout the game. The downside is that the next time you play, it'll have a completely different effect on you, and of course you don't know what the green potion does or the blue potion. The enemies don't always like each other. They're not all entirely about just killing you. They'll mark you as their primary target, but if they get in each other's way, they'll get annoyed with each other. Some of them just simply don't like each other. They're from different classes and they will fight each other. So I found myself in one situation where there were two types of enemies and they were really crowding in on me, and I just kind of stepped aside for a little bit and they basically killed each other. There was just a few left over for me to mop up at the end, which was extremely useful because I don't think I'd have managed to beat them all. There was like 8 of them, and if you look at Brian's feature from last year, that is a big part of the design that they've put together as part of this game. And again, you watch the different characters and you see how they interact with each other, and that helps you to get through the game, figuring out which ones don't like each other. And if you get to use some of those some of those platform traps, and you can leave some people who hate each other on a little platform island somewhere, then the result is total happiness for you. There is a 4-player co-op mode. Talking to the guys yesterday, they said to me, this is the way to play. If you just want to have a bit of fun and you want to get through the game without it being too tough, then go with the multiplayer option. But I suspect it's it's a 4 to 6 hour game when you play on your own. If you can make your way all the way through it, with a certain level of competence. But we all know that what this is going to spawn is quite a lot of speed runs, and that will be interesting to see how long the fastest ones of those take. So Necropolis is out on March 17 for Windows PC. There was a story today on Polygon this morning that Namco Bandai is also publishing the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 versions, which will be out in the summer. If you want to find out more about Necropolis, go to Polygon and search for Necropolis, or just look out for our review, which no doubt will be out in the weeks ahead. So enjoy the rest of this video. This is Necropolis.